Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back into the studio. It took me long enough, but we're finally here. This is going to be the final episode of the sculpting portion of our Patreon exclusive series. Today we'll finish up the portrait and the sculpture itself. It's been over a year in the making, and you can let that be a lesson in patience and also a lesson in the strength of this material, water-based clay that is. If tended to nicely, it can survive for a very, very long time, clearly. Even a small sculpture like this. Anyways, on to the video and to the final touch, the portrait. Once I feel good that the width of the eye sockets are close to being established, I can begin to sculpt the eyes. Doing the eyes before the eye sockets are ready is pretty much a waste of time, as they'll have to be re-sculpted. And one thing that often enough happens to people is that they begin the eyes before the bony structure of the eye socket is well established. And this means that their eyes will be placed too close together. And many students struggle with pushing the eyes further out once this issue becomes apparent. And you can dodge this issue, you can dodge this whole issue by simply holding off on the eyes until the width of the eye sockets is pretty much where it needs to be, or at least very close. Furthermore, you can help yourself out by not beginning with the inside corners of the eyes. Begin with the middle of the eye and work on how deep the eye needs to sit within the eye socket. It might be hard to see, but in the beginning when working on the eye, I was just working with a wedge for an eye, a pancake. Just like we did on the portrait to begin with, essentially a profile, right? A narrow profile. This way, I established the depth from the side view and also the height of the eye. From the front, I can then concern myself only with the shape of the eye that I'm attempting to make, without having to deal with the position too much. Of course, from the front I will make subtle adjustments to the position, but for the most part it will already have been dealt with from the side view. It is, however, always an issue that things get out of whack, of course, when you work on the eyes. It's easy for things to drift, and so paying close attention, having a center line, and perhaps when working on the eyes even a mirror present that you can look into and make sure nothing drifts too far can really help you out. Observing your work in the mirror will really make any issues with symmetry pop. It'll make it very easy to see for you. It can be a bit jarring if you've never done it before. It can be a bit depressing to look at your work in the mirror, but sometimes it's necessary, and it's definitely a good trick. A mirror is a good tool to have around. I decided with this piece to go with closed eyes for a few reasons. Open eyes are much harder as there is much more information to sculpt. In this scale it's extra difficult because if we attempt to represent the eyes as we would in larger scale portrait, they tend to look way too intense, like the sculpture is on drugs or something like that. So I personally prefer for portraits in this scale to be a little bit more impressionistic instead of representing the reality of the situation. Now, both methods can certainly be successful, and this is more of a personal thing, I'd say. This means that if I were to attempt to sculpt the eyes open, I would have to fumble around for a lot longer in order to work out how to make the eyes look good from an impressionistic standpoint. What edges do I lose? What do I represent in order for the eyes to read like eyes, even though they are just somewhat similar to real eyes? You have to deal with the gaze when it comes to open eyes as well, which is extremely difficult, and especially in this scale, it's very, very minuscule work. Both eyes must obviously aim in the same direction, otherwise we get a figure that looks a bit cross-eyed, and unless this is intentional, it will definitely be a distraction from an otherwise successful piece. So, closed eyes lets me off the hook a little bit. The lower lid is hardly going to be visible, so most of the work is going to be done to the upper lid. The shape of the upper lid is going to be quite simple, and the major worry is more how it interacts with the eye socket at the top of the eyelid. Pulling the eye further out, or even pushing it in if I have to, is much easier with closed eyes, as I don't have a ton of details to deal with, so it gives me some leeway when it comes to the positioning of the eye as well. A little bit more wiggle room, if you will. I won't have to re-sculpt delicate detail if I get something a bit wrong the first time around, which I of course inevitably do. So, closed eyes might seem to some of you like a bit of a cop-out, the easy way out, if you will, and perhaps this is somewhat true. But it's also true that closed eyes fit this pose and this sculpture quite well, and closed eyes look very good in this scale. We have already performed several cop-outs, by the way, during this process in the name of creating an impression versus actually sculpting the reality of the situation. Remember how we dealt with the feet, for example. Sometimes, what can seem like a weak move and easy out can actually benefit the sculpture as a whole. We have to remember to step back and observe and judge things as a whole, not as individual parts. And when doing so, I think that the closed eyes were a pretty decent choice. Perhaps easier than open ones, but definitely fitting considering the piece that these closed eyes belong to. And don't worry, next Patreon exclusive video series is going to be on portraits, so I will certainly cover how to sculpt open eyes as well in the near future and in a larger scale, so it becomes a little bit easier for you to see. The eyes is one of the more delicate areas that we need to sculpt and require me to compartmentalize in order to deal with sculpting them successfully. And what I mean by this is dealing with one simple task at a time, or answering one simple question at a time. So to begin with, I'll focus on placing them left to right, up and down from the side view. And this is a fairly simple but very important task. I have already narrowed down where they need to go, of course, by working out the eye socket, and I can observe other elements of my profile that I trust and place the eye well in comparison to these. One that I'll often use is the angle break between the brow and the nose, and I'll use that as kind of a guide. This is another good reason, by the way, to make a good profile. If you do, you can use the profile to place other elements, other features, such as the eyes. And that's pretty much it for this video series on sculpting a half life-size figure. We've gone through all the steps from armature building all the way through to sculpting and finishing the piece. We will be making the mold for this sculpture and cast it as well, of course, so stay tuned for that in the near future. I will post a little addendum video to this series next week after I get some proper shots of the sculpture, some good B-roll. And I'll make sure to post that video here on the Patreon page like normal. We will continue on with a Patreon exclusive video series, and the next series that we will embark on is going to be sculpting the portrait. We will start at the very beginning and sculpt a skull, which is an exercise that all students do at the Florence Academy of Art as well before beginning with portraiture. Then we'll continue on with sculpting a life-size portrait from a live model. And this new portrait series will begin next month. And I hope that all of you that were here and excited for this video series and joined up because of it will be excited for the next one as well. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one.